My daughter had just secured the only fully funded Oxford Fellowship in her graduating class. A crowning achievement I thought we shared, but just days before her flight across the Atlantic, she secretly liquidated our only family brownstone in New York, drained my life savings, and transferred every last cent into offshore accounts. Standing in the empty foyer, she looked at me with cold, unfamiliar eyes, claiming that her lifetime of misery was entirely my fault. Her father's chronic infidelity, and her fiancé's elitist family rejecting her. All of it, she insisted, happened because I was nothing but a useless, unemployed housewife with no income. Pushed to the absolute brink by the only family I had left. The betrayal struck a fatal blow to my shattered heart. I closed my eyes, entirely consumed by the darkness. When I opened them again, the scent of hospital antiseptic filled my lungs. I had returned to the year my daughter was 5. The rhythmic, piercing beep of a heart monitor anchored me back to reality. I was standing in the freezing, fluorescent-lit corridor of Mount Sinai's pediatric intensive care unit. A few moments later, a doctor in pale blue scrubs pushed through the heavy double doors. He pulled down his surgical mask, his expression a mix of professional relief and stern reprimand. "Your daughter is out of the woods, her vitals are stabilizing," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the sterile hall. "But I have to be blunt, you need to be much more careful. How on earth does a 5-year-old gain access to adult blood pressure medication? If you hadn't brought her into the ER when you did, we would be having a very different tragic conversation right now." Maria, our live-in nanny, was trembling beside me. Her eyes were red and swollen, tears spilling over her deeply lined cheeks. "Mrs. Miller, I swear to God, I didn't do it on purpose," she sobbed, her voice cracking under the weight of her guilt. "Chloe was playing in the living room while I was prepping dinner in the kitchen. She must have climbed the bathroom counter to reach the medicine cabinet. It was my negligence. I looked away for just 5 minutes." She broke down entirely, weeping openly, and begging me not to terminate her employment. I stood there, looking down at the linoleum floor, completely silent. In my previous life, this exact moment had been a turning point of rage and panic. I had screamed at Maria right here in the hospital hallway, threatening her with a massive civil lawsuit for gross negligence if she didn't pack her bags and resign immediately. By the time Chloe was discharged from the pediatric ward, Maria was already gone. Back then, I took an extended leave of absence from my career to care for Chloe. I was 33 years old, a rising department director at a Fortune 500 tech firm in Manhattan. During those 3 weeks at home, my phone rang incessantly. The firm was in the middle of a massive quarterly launch, and my team desperately needed my direction. Terrified of leaving Chloe's side, and determined not to let the project fail, I handed over my primary accounts and executive clearance to my deputy director, Mia. Ultimately, Mia performed spectacularly and absorbed my role permanently. Yes, I had resigned. My husband David and I had been too paranoid to hire another nanny, paralyzed by the fear that Chloe might be endangered again. One night, after settling Chloe into bed, David wrapped his arms around me and whispered the words that would seal my fate. "Don't go back to the corporate grind," he had said softly. "Stay home and raise our little girl. I'll cover your retirement contributions, and my paycheck is yours. I will take care of my wife and daughter." Before I officially handed in my resignation, my lingering practical instincts flared up. I dragged David to the property lawyer's office and insisted we transfer the deed of our Manhattan brownstone entirely into Chloe's name. He was visibly annoyed, arguing that it was unnecessary since we were a family, and it didn't matter whose name was on the paper. But I insisted, thinking that if he ever strayed or our marriage collapsed, the real estate would serve as an impenetrable safety net for our daughter. I was wrong. I was so unbelievably wrong. I remembered my daughter at 10 years old, tilting her innocent face up at me and asking, "Mommy, why are all my friends' moms doctors or finance executives, but you're just a housewife?" At the time, I gently stroked her hair and smiled. "Because it means I get to have all the time in the world to watch you grow up, sweetie." I remembered her at 16, her face twisted in a vicious sneer, screaming at the top of her lungs, I never asked for you to follow me around. I don't need your time. I need money. And then, the ultimate betrayal. My 22-year-old daughter, standing in the international departure terminal at JFK Airport, dripping in designer labels, while I was bedridden in an oncology ward, undergoing brutal chemotherapy for breast cancer. She had hired a broker to quietly sell the only home we had in New York, using the excuse that she needed proof of funds for her British student visa. She had manipulated me into handing over my bank authorizations, draining my entire life savings. When I was finally discharged from the hospital, weak and frail, the building's management informed me the property had closed. I was given exactly 1 week to vacate. It defied all logic. When she was hospitalized as a child, I sacrificed a lucrative, high-powered career to nurse her. When I was hospitalized as an adult, she stripped me of my home, my money, and my dignity. I remembered confronting her at the airport, my frail body shaking as I demanded answers. You sold the house. You took every dime I had to my name, just so you could buy Prada bags and Gucci coats? Chloe had just laughed, a cold, hollow sound. What do you mean your money? Every dollar in that house was earned by Dad. You haven't contributed a single cent to this family. In her eyes, cooking 3 organic meals a day wasn't a contribution. Maintaining a pristine household wasn't a contribution. Staying up until 2 a.m. tutoring her through AP Calculus and SAT Prep for 4 years wasn't a contribution. Dad cheated on you because you refused to work, she had screamed over the airport announcements. No successful man wants to come home to a broke housewife who does nothing but check his phone out of insecurity. My fiancé's parents are Ivy League executives, she continued, twisting the knife. They looked down on our family dynamic. They wanted a daughter-in-law from a respected, high-achieving family, and they forced him to dump me. Dad worked so hard for years, climbing the corporate ladder. And you just dragged him down. You ruined this family. And you ruined my relationship. Her final words echoed in my mind like a death sentence. I hate you. Once my flight takes off, I am never coming back. Even if you drop dead, I won't come to your funeral. Maria's desperate sobbing snapped me out of my nightmarish reverie. Mrs. Miller, please. I am begging you. Give me one more chance. She was an older woman, and she knew perfectly well that finding another placement in Manhattan, with the generous salary and fair treatment I provided, would be nearly impossible. A profound wave of exhaustion washed over me. I rubbed my temples, the fluorescent light suddenly too bright. Stop crying, Maria. I never said I was going to fire you, she gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief before she immediately began swearing oaths of vigilance. Oh, thank you, ma'am. I promise you. I swear on my life. I will watch Chloe like a hawk from now on. Chloe remained in the hospital for 7 days, and throughout that entire week, Maria barely left her side, tending to her with obsessive care. My husband, David, was furious with me for not taking time off to sit by Chloe's hospital bed myself. He cornered me in the hospital cafeteria, his voice a harsh accusatory whisper. Anna, our daughter almost died, and you aren't even taking the week off to nurse her. You are her mother. I met his angry gaze with deadpan calm. And you are her father, David scoffed, defensively crossing his arms. You know how slammed I am at the firm right now. Being a mid-level manager means dealing with an endless mountain of administrative garbage. I barely have time to breathe, let alone sit in a pediatric ward all day. Well then, I replied coldly, taking a sip of my terrible hospital coffee. Since we are both so busy building our careers, neither of us needs to sacrifice our jobs. That is exactly what we pay Maria for. At the mention of the nanny, David's face went purple. You're seriously keeping her? Are you insane? She almost killed our kid. He ranted for a few minutes before his posture deflated, his tone shifting into the manipulative softness I now recognized so clearly. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. Honey, he said gently, at the end of the day, I just can't stomach the idea of a stranger raising Chloe. Why don't you just quit your job? I'll make sure your retirement accounts are funded, and my entire paycheck will go to my 2 favorite girls. Chloe is so little, Anna. She desperately needs her mother's presence right now. There it was. The exact same poison-laced proposal from my past life. In reality, after I quit, He contributed to my 401k for barely 3 years before abruptly stopping, claiming the New York mortgage rates were squeezing us too tight. Slowly, he took complete control over our finances, revoking my access to his primary accounts. There were weeks when I literally had to beg him for grocery money. Later, as the years dragged on, he would casually mock me, claiming I was completely out of touch with the modern world, and that we no longer had any intellectual common ground. He began coming home later and later, using endless business trips and client dinners as excuses to stay away. The moment Chloe finished her final high school exams, he didn't waste a single second. He immediately filed for divorce so he could marry the woman he proudly described as a fascinating independent career woman. Every penny in our accounts was earned through my blood and sweat. He had told me coldly across the mediation table, "Agreeing to leave you with $60,000 is an act of pure charity on my part." I have been more than generous, and even that pitiful $60,000 was eventually conned out of me by my own daughter. I stared into his eyes, refusing to let history repeat itself. "I am not quitting my job, David," I said firmly. David leaned back, clearly displeased. "Then what about Chloe? Who is going to raise her?" I maintained an icy rational composure as I broke it down for him. "My career is on a steep upward trajectory. Barring any disasters, I am on track to make vice president within the next 5 years. When that happens, my annual compensation will be exactly double yours." "So," I continued, offering him a razor-sharp smile, "if you are truly that distressed about a nanny watching our daughter, you are more than welcome to submit your resignation and become a stay-at-home dad." David's mouth opened, but no words came out. He stared at me dumbfounded, before letting out a frustrated sigh, grabbing his briefcase and storming out of the cafeteria. David and I had met in grad school at NYU. He was a brilliant, hard-working kid who clawed his way out of a dead-end, Rust Belt town in Ohio, earning a full-ride scholarship to get his master's. My background was vastly different. I grew up in an affluent Connecticut suburb. When we got married, my parents gifted us the lion's share of the down payment for our brownstone, which combined with our savings from 4 years in the corporate world, allowed us to plant our roots in the city. Right now, our lives were financially comfortable and objectively improving. I had no intention of serving him divorce papers immediately. First, legally and practically, he hadn't actually committed any overt betrayals yet. Second, I was morbidly curious. If I refused to become a financially dependent housewife this time around, would David still seek out an affair? And my daughter, Chloe, if I was a powerful executive instead of a stay-at-home mom, would she still grow up to harbor such a venomous hatred for me? 10 years passed in the blink of an eye. My career skyrocketed. I had bypassed the VP role entirely and secured a position as senior managing director at our firm. Mia was still my most trusted subordinate and closest ally. She was 5 years younger than me and had just been promoted to director herself. In my past life, she was the one who had taken my crown after I stepped down. We had lost touch back then, though I often watched her life unfold with bitter envy through social media. She was fiercely child-free and uninterested in marriage, refusing to chain herself to a mortgage or the burden of raising a legacy. By the time she turned 40, she had amassed a small fortune, quit her high-stress job, and rented a sprawling rustic farmhouse in Napa Valley, spending her days cultivating gardens, wine tasting, and surrounded by rescue dogs. On a brisk Tuesday morning, Mia slipped into my glass-walled office and carefully closed the door behind her. Leaning over my mahogany desk, she lowered her voice. "Anna, you might want to keep a very close eye on David." Her younger brother worked in the same tech division as my husband, and years ago, I had quietly asked Mia to have him keep his ear to the ground. I met her gaze and gave a slow, knowing nod. The inevitable had finally arrived. That evening, I got home early and threw together a simple healthy dinner: grilled chicken, roasted asparagus, and quinoa. Maria had retired to Florida 3 years ago, and I hadn't hired a full-time live-in nanny since. We had a cleaning service, but I still managed the day-to-day upkeep. For the past 10 years, I had paid every single cent of the domestic help's wages out of my own pocket. When I had brought this up to David, he had shrugged it off with infuriating entitlement. They're doing the household chores that you're supposed to be managing. Obviously, their paychecks should come out of your account. Chloe trudged through the front door, dropping her heavy prep school backpack onto the hardwood floor. She took one look at the healthy, understated meal on the dining table and wrinkled her nose in disgust. "This looks completely tasteless," she grumbled. "I didn't even look up from my iPad." "If you don't want it, scrape it into the trash, and wash your plate while you're at it." Chloe let out a dramatic groan, stomping down the hallway to her bedroom, and slamming the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames. 10 minutes later, she marched back out, violently shaking her crumpled, grass-stained field hockey uniform. "Mom, why didn't you wash my uniform? I have literally nothing clean to wear to school tomorrow." I continued scrolling through my emails, my voice perfectly level. "Walk into the kitchen, take a sharp left to the utility room, and you will find a magnificent invention called a washing machine. Do not look for me to do it." Chloe's face flushed bright red with teenage indignation. "I am drowning in AP classes and extracurriculars. Doing the laundry and cooking meals are small things that the mother of the house is supposed to handle." I finally looked up, meeting her furious glare with absolute coldness. "I am also drowning in work, Chloe, and quite frankly, does your heavy academic schedule benefit me in any way? You're going to get into a top college, get a high-paying job, and keep all the money for yourself. None of it is going into my pocket." Chloe let out a dark, mocking laugh. "Keep treating me like this. Mom, just wait until you're old and sick, rotting in a hospital bed with absolutely no one to take care of you. You're going to regret this." I'd rather be rotting alone in a hospital bed than watch my own flesh and blood steal my life savings and leave me for dead, I thought to myself. Just then, the front door unlocked, and David walked in, loosening his tie. He immediately gravitated toward Chloe, playing the role of the doting father, asking her how she did on her midterms. Chloe instantly melted into a puddle of victimhood, whining to him. "Don't even ask." My rank dropped again. "My lab partner, Sarah, is still valedictorian. You know why? Because her mom quit her law firm to stay home. She bakes her fresh pastries every afternoon and tutors her for the SATs full-time. Not like my mom, who literally does nothing for this family." David turned to me, his brow furrowed in severe disapproval. "Chloe is taking her SATs and applying to college this year. Can't you at least put in the effort to cook her a decent meal?" I set my iPad face down on the table and stared directly at him. "Why don't you cook her a decent meal? Did you lose your hands in a tragic accident, David? Or are you just a giant mouth masquerading as a man?" David's face contorted into a mask of pure offense. "Anna, can we not have a civilized conversation? Do you always have to escalate things to the point of a blowout?" "Oh, I was escalating things. All right." I calmly unzipped my leather briefcase, pulled out a pristine stack of legal documents, and slid them across the granite kitchen island, along with a silver Mont Blanc pen. "Sign them," I said. "It is the divorce petition. It is what you've been dreaming of." It was finally over. We had run the maze for 10 more years, only to hit the exact same brick wall. Even though I hadn't become a housewife in this timeline, even though I was a highly respected executive bringing in millions, my husband still looked for a mistress, and my daughters still found every excuse to despise me. From the very beginning, their fundamental nature dictated how this story would end. David stared at the manila folder on the counter, utterly paralyzed. "Are you insane? Can't whatever this is wait until Chloe finishes her college applications? You don't even deserve to be called a mother," Chloe shrieked, genuine tears of anger welling in her eyes. "What is the point of you working so hard out there? What is the point of all the money you make? You don't even care about this family. You have never sacrificed a single thing for us." In her mind, because her father occasionally bought her a shiny new MacBook, or took her on weekend ski trips, he was the ultimate parent. Yet, in my past life, when I gave up my identity to scrub toilets and manage her education full-time, I was also accused of never contributing. A genuine, relaxed smile spread across my face. The hundreds of thousands in nanny and maid fees over the years. Paid by me. The meals you've eaten in this house. Paid for and cooked by me. Why don't you ask your wonderful father exactly who he has been sacrificing his time and money for lately? David's hand visibly twitched against the granite countertop. You know exactly what kind of man I am, he stammered, his voice tight. You don't have to fabricate wild accusations just to win a custody battle. The absolute audacity of the man. Chloe stepped between us, shielding her father. Don't worry, Dad. I don't care what lies she makes up. I am choosing to live with you. I let out a sharp, breathless laugh, unable to hold back my relief. Deal, the terms are set. I pointed to the first clause of the divorce agreement. Daughter's custody goes entirely to the father. I had spent 2 lifetimes playing the agonizing, thankless roles of a devoted wife and a martyr mother. Now, with a few strokes of a pen, I could instantly amputate both of these parasitic weights from my life and walk away completely free. I couldn't help but wonder how Chloe would react when she finally discovered that her beloved, hardworking father wasn't just supporting her. He was quietly funneling his salary to a much younger woman. Chloe practically spat her next words at me, her voice dripping with teenage venom. From this moment on, you are no longer my mother. And don't even think about showing up to the senior winter gala. My smile only widened. That works out perfectly. Mia and I already bought VIP tickets for a concert that night anyway, 3 months before graduation. As was the tradition, the elite Manhattan prep school hosted a lavish senior gala for the graduating class. In my previous life, I had been desperate to ensure my daughter could attend this crucial milestone feeling like royalty. I made the agonizing decision to sell the vintage Cartier bracelet my parents had gifted me on my wedding day, scraping together $400 to buy her a beautiful modest dress from a local boutique. That evening, I had prepared a massive lavish dinner, eagerly waiting to surprise her with the gift. But when the father and daughter walked through the front door, laughing and chatting, my eyes immediately fell to the luxurious garment bag clutched in Chloe's hand. It was from an exclusive high-end designer on Madison Avenue. A single gown from their collection easily cost tens of thousands of dollars. David pulled the gown out of the bag and held it up against Chloe's frame. The exquisite embossed detailing and the luminous pearlescent silk radiated sheer, unadulterated luxury. Chloe's face was completely illuminated with an expression of profound joy and utter satisfaction. Quietly, I took the humble $400 dress I had sacrificed so much for and hid it in the back of my closet. Compared to the magnificent couture David had bought her, my gift looked embarrassingly cheap and pathetic. It was on that exact day that I officially gave up any thought of fighting him for custody. Originally, I had planned that once she graduated and no longer needed daily supervision, I would work 3 minimum wage jobs, delivering food, driving Ubers, scrubbing floors, just to support her, solely so she wouldn't be raised by an unfaithful father. But seeing her with him, she looked so incredibly happy. I was willing to suffer, but I couldn't bear the thought of forcing my daughter to suffer alongside me. On the night of the senior gala, I stood in the crowd wearing a plain, faded trench coat, watching her walk down the red carpet, her designer gown glittering under the camera flashes. She deliberately averted her gaze, actively avoiding my eyes. She didn't want any of her wealthy classmates to know that the frumpy woman in the crowd was her mother. Sometime later, Chloe accidentally stumbled upon the boutique dress I had bought her, the price tag still attached. She marched into the living room, dangling the fabric in front of my face. Dad is out there working himself to the bone to earn a living, and you don't bring in a single cent. How can you justify wasting money so recklessly? That night, with tears streaming down my face, I took a pair of heavy fabric scissors and cut the dress into unrecognizable shreds. Sitting comfortably in my corner office, I swiped through the live video feed my private investigator had just sent to my phone. David and his mistress were walking hand in hand through Saks Fifth Avenue, right before Chloe caught them red-handed. Of course, it wasn't a coincidence. I was the one who tipped her off. The moment the investigator pinned their location, I used an untraceable burner number to send Chloe a single text message. Your dad brought me shopping on Fifth Avenue again. The money he refuses to spend on you will ultimately all be spent on me. In the video, Chloe, still wearing her plaid school uniform, was engaged in a vicious screaming physical altercation with an impeccably dressed young woman, literally tearing out the woman's expensive hair extensions. A massive crowd of wealthy shoppers had formed a circle around them, eagerly watching the spectacle. David was desperately trying to pull his daughter away, but his efforts were entirely useless. In a moment of panic, he used his full body weight and violently shoved Chloe backward. Chloe lost her footing and crashed hard onto the polished marble floor. She had never been subjected to such physical humiliation in her entire life. She immediately burst into tears, her eyes wide with disbelief, overflowing with a mixture of raw grievance and fiery rage. "Dad, you just pushed me to the ground to protect some home-wrecking mistress." A flicker of guilt crossed David's face, but he stood firm, rigidly shielding the young woman behind him. "Stop making a scene, Chloe. Sophie is 2 months pregnant. You are going to have a biological little brother and a happy 4-person family. Don't let a moment of irrational anger destroy everything." Chloe let out a dark, hysterical laugh, pointing a trembling finger at her own chest. "Me, I am the one destroying everything." She aggressively pointed at the woman cowering behind him. "The person who destroyed this family is her. What does she have that my mother doesn't? What is so wrong with my mom? She literally makes double your salary." David sighed deeply, looking down at his daughter. "Chloe, do you remember when you were 5, you had a terrible accident and almost died in the ICU? Your mother was so obsessed with her career that she couldn't even be bothered to take care of you. For your entire life, your mother has never prioritized this family. But Sophie, the literal day after we found out she was pregnant, she decided to file her resignation. She is going to dedicate her entire life to staying home and raising your brother, while you." Chloe brutally cut him off. Brother, you are completely obsessed with having a son. You are betraying your own family and spouting all these pathetic, hypocritical excuses. Let me tell you right now, she ruined my home, and I am going to make her pay the price." She lunged forward, desperately trying to claw past David's arms, to grab the younger woman's hair and smash her head against the display window. Chloe had lived a life completely insulated from hardship. Even among the Manhattan elite, she had enjoyed a remarkably privileged, sheltered existence. It was exactly this upbringing that had fostered her incredibly arrogant and entitled personality. But her carefree, princess-like reality was abruptly shattering today. Furious and embarrassed, David raised his hand and slapped her sharply across the face. "That is enough, Chloe. The divorce papers are already signed, and your mother has formally abandoned her custody rights. If you ever expect to see a single dime from me for your Ivy League tuition and living expenses, you will stop this tantrum immediately and go home." Chloe's beautiful face was drenched in tears, her breath catching in violent, heaving sobs. "Home? I don't have a home anymore." David had spoiled her rotten since the day she was born. This was the first time he had ever laid a hand on her. My soon-to-be ex-husband was a man who worshipped his public image. Having his teenage daughter cause a physical brawl in the middle of a luxury department store was the ultimate humiliation. He grabbed the disheveled Sophie by the arm, aggressively pushed his way through the circle of onlookers, and fled the scene. Right next to them was a high-end audio electronics boutique. The manager, clearly entertained by the drama, turned up a display speaker and blasted Justin Timberlake's "What Goes Around Comes Around." Several amused bystanders actually started clapping along to the beat. The entire situation was incredibly comical. I knew with absolute certainty that on this day, the perfect loving father Chloe idolized had died in her eyes forever. I closed the video player on my phone and wired the final payment to the private investigator's account. Mia strolled into my office, carrying 2 brown paper bags filled with Shake Shack. "Anna, it is late. Why are you still at the office?" I pulled up a chair and gestured for her to sit with me by the floor-to-ceiling windows. The glittering, illuminated skyline of Manhattan stretched out endlessly beneath us. The distant skyscrapers glowed like diamond-encrusted sculptures, and the intricate grid of moving headlights looked like a flowing, restless river of stars. I offered her a gentle smile. I have some good news. Mia paused while unpacking the burgers and raised an eyebrow at me. What a coincidence, so do I. But you go first. Being around Mia was always effortless. The atmosphere was consistently light and joyful. Honestly, far more relaxing than being in my own house. Having worked together for over a decade, I probably spent more waking hours with her than with my own family. She had easily become the absolute best friend I had in this world. I'm legally divorced. Congratulations. She wasn't surprised in the slightest, murmuring the response through a mouthful of fries. When I was 28, I honestly believed I had married the right man. I had an angelic little baby, and I felt like my life's ultimate mission was complete. Back then, getting married and having a child felt exactly like taking the SATs, or finishing my master's degree. It was a mandatory assignment I had to complete, a perfect test score I needed to hand in to society. But too many women completely lose their identities the second they step into a marriage. They treat their husbands and children as the absolute center of their universe, entirely forgetting that they are independent human beings first. I was no exception, but eventually, I woke up. When a relationship provides nothing but endless, suffocating emotional drain, it is time to terminate it. Mia gave me an enthusiastic thumbs up. Preach, perfectly summarized. Congratulations on winning your freedom back. Trust me, your life is about to get infinitely better. In this life, Mia remained fiercely unmarried. She was incredibly successful, possessed the sharp features of a runway model, and had an intimidatingly brilliant track record at the firm. Naturally, she had an endless line of high-profile suitors, but she rejected every single one of them. In her early 30s, her parents constantly harassed her with blind dates, and executives at the firm were always trying to set her up with wealthy heirs. But she had stubbornly held her ground until now. So, what is your good news? I asked. A secretive grin spread across Mia's face as she pulled an iPad from her designer tote bag and swiped through a photo gallery. The first 3 pictures showed a massive sprawling farmhouse property, nestled against a picturesque river in Napa Valley. It looked like a tranquil, idyllic paradise. The following images were architectural blueprints and interior design renders for a beautiful rustic 2-story villa. Mia's excitement bubbled over. Anna, I finally secured the lease on my absolute dream farmhouse. I've already hired a contractor to renovate the property. Next year, I am turning in my badge and moving out west to retire, just as I suspected. Her life trajectory perfectly mirrored my previous timeline. This was the exact lifestyle I had envied most in my past life. Saving up enough capital to retire early, and spending your remaining years surrounded by poetic, natural beauty. That was the ultimate dream for almost everyone, but so many of us simply lose sight of that dream. Trapped forever in a concrete jungle of corporate ladders and mortgages. Anna, do you want to come with me? She looked at me like a guardian angel, her eyes sparkling with absolute sincerity. I had lived in New York for over 20 years. I had gone to grad school here, built my career here, bought a house and started a family. It had long become my second home. I looked back out the window, the sea of headlights blending into a distant, fading dream. Noticing my silence, Mia looked a bit deflated, but quickly pressed on. We could plant giant gardens. We could grow our own tomatoes and fruit trees, and raise chickens, geese, and little bunnies. I chuckled. You're literally rhyming now. Mia eagerly continued. I'll cover the entire cost of the property lease. You just split the daily living expenses with me. We can buy a ton of seeds, build a massive vegetable patch, and get some fluffy little chicks to start a coop. We can eat organic salads and fresh eggs every single day. What do you say, Anna? No. I smiled softly. Mia's face fell into an exaggerated pout. Fine. I guess I can't force you. The lease is split down the middle. 50-50. That night, overlooking the glittering heart of Manhattan's financial district, 2 weary corporate veterans made a pact to grow old together. David had recently taken out a massive mortgage to purchase a property in a newly developed, ultra-luxury high-rise building in Tribeca. That weekend, I was accompanying my old college roommate, Rachel, to the sales gallery of that exact same building. Her son had just been accepted into Columbia University, and since they no longer needed to be tied down to the rigid public school zoning of their outdated Upper West Side co-op, she and her husband had recently sold it. They were looking to combine those funds with some extra capital to upgrade to a premium, modern condominium, in a twist of absolute, almost comical irony. As we were touring a beautifully staged penthouse model unit, we ran right into my ex-husband and his new family, if you counted the child currently gestating in his new wife's stomach. They were a family of 4. David and Sophie were laughing intimately, their voices echoing off the floor-to-ceiling windows as they admired the sprawling, open-concept living and dining area. Trailing a few feet behind them was my daughter, Chloe, her eyes entirely vacant, looking as lifeless as a wooden marionette. "Honey," Sophie purred, her voice dripping with calculated sweetness. "I can contribute $50,000 toward the down payment. Can we put my name on the deed too, please?" I stood in the hallway, completely amused, watching the spectacle unfold. A unit of this square footage in this particular zip code required a bare minimum down payment of at least $3 million. David immediately went into damage control, coddling her. "Babe, that $50,000 was my engagement gift to you. You keep it and spend it on yourself. Buy whatever you want. If you run out, you just ask your husband for more." "But David, I really want my name on the house," she whined, pouting her lips. "If my name isn't on the property, I just won't feel a sense of security being with you." David continued to coax her with the strained patience of a man walking on a tightrope. "Look at you, why are you worrying about security again? Regardless of whose name is on the paperwork, this penthouse is ultimately going to be left to our son anyway." Hearing this, Chloe's hands instantly balled into tight fists, her manicured nails digging so deeply into her palms that her knuckles turned stark white. "Well, that is not necessarily true," Sophie countered, feigning innocence while casting a side-eye toward Chloe. "If the deed is solely in your name, then legally, both your future son and your current daughter will have equal inheritance rights." David waved off her concern without a second thought. "Oh, put your mind at ease. Chloe would never fight our son for this place. Her mother still has that massive brownstone after all." Before I could even open my mouth to defend my own assets, my college roommate, Rachel, beat me to the punch. "Excuse me," Rachel snapped, stepping into the room with an icy glare. "Since when does Anna's property fall under your jurisdiction to divide and assign?" David froze, clearly startled by our sudden appearance. He opened his mouth to stammer out an explanation, but Sophie saw an opportunity and proactively stepped forward. She was undeniably young and objectively beautiful. Her long dark hair fell in effortless, expensive waves, and her skin possessed that flawless, dewy glow of youth. Even while pregnant, she was dressed to the nines in tailored designer maternity wear. She walked right up to me, offering a polite but razor-thin smile. "You must be the ex-wife. It is so lovely to run into you here. You shouldn't be celebrating just yet." I thought to myself, knowing exactly where this was going. She was definitely here to pick a fight. Sure enough, her tone shifted, becoming sharp and authoritative. "Actually, there is a legal matter I have been meaning to discuss with you. When would you be available to schedule a sit-down?" I crossed my arms completely unbothered. "I am available right now. Speak your mind." David panicked. He aggressively grabbed Sophie's arm, his face pale. "Don't make a scene here, Sophie. We will talk about this at home." Sophie violently ripped her arm out of his grasp, glaring at me as she enunciated every single word. "The townhouse you currently occupy legally belongs half to David. When you two finalize the divorce, David felt guilty and generously left the property entirely to you. But as his current wife, I find that incredibly unfair." I tilted my head, studying her delusion. "And what exactly is unfair about it?" "Even though he was technically the at-fault party in the divorce, the court system would never support you completely monopolizing an asset that was purchased jointly during the marriage," she stated with supreme confidence. "If we take you to civil court to sue for his half of the equity, there is a very high probability that we will win." "Sophie," a cold, trembling voice interrupted. It was Chloe, who had been completely silent until now. "You stole my father. And you stole the savings he promised to leave for me, and now, you are actually trying to steal the house my mother left for me. Whoever said that house was being left for you? I mused internally. Though I kept my face perfectly blank, I chose not to correct my daughter in that moment. It was blindingly obvious that Chloe and her new stepmother despised each other. If I shot Chloe down now, it would only validate Sophie and fuel her arrogant momentum. Sophie maintained her sickeningly calm composure. This isn't stealing, Chloe. This is simply utilizing the proper legal channels to protect my rightful. I impatiently cut her off, bored by her amateur legal posturing. Great. Go ahead and sue me. She clearly hadn't expected me to be so dismissive and direct. She blinked, temporarily stunned into silence, struggling to formulate a comeback. I took a step closer, my voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. When we bought that house decades ago, my parents provided the vast majority of the down payment. David contributed less than $30,000, and I have already formally repaid him that exact sum during the divorce settlement. Furthermore, I continued, watching her face drop, I have been the sole provider paying off that mortgage for the past several years. Is there anything else you are confused about, Miss Sophie? Sophie's mask of serene confidence shattered entirely. She whipped her head around to glare at David, her voice rising in fury. David, you lied to me. You swore up and down that you paid for the down payment on that house all by yourself. Seeing his web of lies completely unravel, David rushed to pacify her. Baby, please don't get angry. It is bad for the baby's heart rate. Didn't you say you wanted your name on the new house? I promise you, I will put both of our names on the deed for this penthouse, okay? Instantly, a bright, triumphant smile returned to Sophie's face, but David's expression was visibly dark, burdened by the crushing financial reality he had just locked himself into. Rachel, my college roommate, fell in love with the layout and the sweeping views of the Tribeca building. She stepped out onto the terrace, made a brief phone call to her husband, who was currently out of state on a business trip, and within 10 minutes, she walked back in and decided to purchase the apartment right on the spot. Back in the main lobby of the sales center, my ex-husband and his fractured family were seated at the VIP desk right next to ours, signing their mortgage paperwork. Sophie overheard that Rachel was finalizing an all-cash purchase for her unit. A vile mix of envy and bitterness washed over her face as she leaned into David. Wow, her husband is so capable, she whispered loudly, intending to be heard, dropping millions on a penthouse in cash without even blinking. Our monthly mortgage payments are going to be suffocating. You really need to work harder and make more money, hubby. David's voice was as cold as ice. She is my ex-wife's college roommate. She got her PhD straight out of undergrad and is now a tenured professor at Columbia University. The money they are using to buy this house was earned through 20 solid years of relentless, mutual hard work as a couple. The smug smile on Sophie's face froze solid, but she stubbornly clung to her transactional worldview, whining back at him. But David, I am so much younger than you. It is your absolute duty to provide for me and take care of me. Chloe finally reached her breaking point. She slammed her hand on the glass table and screamed, Lady, you are a middle-aged woman yourself. Can you stop acting like a pathetic gold digger for 5 seconds? You are absolutely disgusting. Immediately, a vicious screaming argument erupted between the two of them, right in the middle of the lobby. Watching them tear each other apart, my mind suddenly drifted back to a vivid memory from many years ago. When our original family of 3 went house hunting, Chloe was only 3 years old at the time. I remembered exactly how she looked, bouncing up and down in the model apartment, her face glowing with pure unadulterated joy. I remembered how she refused to leave the beautifully decorated, pink-themed children's bedroom. Seeing how much she loved it was the exact reason I made the firm decision to empty my savings and buy that specific house. Before that milestone, we had been cramped in a tiny, dilapidated, 400-square-foot walk-up apartment. On the day we finally got the keys, my little girl ran wildly through the empty, spacious rooms, looking like a joyful little deer, exploring a magical forest. In that fleeting moment, my heart had felt so incredibly soft, entirely devoted to her happiness. But by the time she entered middle school, that magical house was no longer enough. She became deeply dissatisfied with it, constantly demanding that we upgrade to something much larger and far more expensive. She always had an endless list of incredibly entitled justifications. I desperately need a private dance studio, a soundproof room for my cello, an art studio, and a massive walk-in closet. She had complained one evening at the dinner table. "Mom, you make so much money at the firm. Why can't you just buy us a bigger mansion? So what if you have to take out a bigger loan? It is not like you can't afford the payments. My lab partner lives in a literal estate with a gated courtyard. I'm not even asking you to buy me a Hamptons estate." I had been so exhausted from a 70-hour work week that I didn't even argue. I just stood up and slapped her directly across the face. "What gives you the right to make demands of my money?" I had asked her, my voice shaking with fatigue and disappointment. At the time, Chloe had stared at me with pure unmasked shock and hatred. "You act like an evil, wicked stepmother," she had screamed before running to her room. Well, look at her now. She finally had a real evil stepmother to contend with. 6 months later, I officially finalized the sale of my Manhattan brownstone. On the day the professional movers arrived to haul away my old furniture, Chloe unexpectedly appeared at the entrance of the building. It was the peak of summer vacation, right after high school graduation. Most of her wealthy prep school peers were currently backpacking through Europe or lounging on private yachts in the Mediterranean. Chloe's academic performance had tanked drastically compared to my previous life. She had barely managed to scrape an acceptance into a low-tier private liberal arts college that cost an astronomical $50,000 a year in tuition alone. Over the past few weeks, my ex-husband had repeatedly reached out, heavily implying that his new mortgage was bleeding him dry, and asking if I could shoulder a significant portion of our daughter's college expenses. I completely ignored his texts. But internally, I laughed at his misery. This was the perfect, complete family he had always desperately craved. Before our divorce, he had relentlessly pressured me to have a second child, practically begging me to give him a son, claiming that a family was only truly successful and complete if it had both a boy and a girl. Well, his family was finally complete. The only problem was, he couldn't afford to feed them. Down on the sidewalk, Chloe approached the foreman of the moving crew. "Excuse me, sir. Which unit are you clearing out?" The sweaty mover wiped his brow. "Oh, we retaking everything out of 602. I stepped out of the service elevator, dragging a single sleek silver suitcase behind me. I walked past her without acknowledging her presence and nodded to the foreman. "Thank you for your hard work. Everything is loaded. Let's get going." Chloe lunged forward, blocking my path. "Don't you dare leave." I didn't even bother to turn around. She continued, her voice trembling with panic. "The girl next door told me there had been a bunch of strangers coming to tour our house recently. I didn't want to believe it, but I can't believe you actually went behind my back and sold it. How could you possibly make a massive decision like that without asking me? That was the house you were supposed to leave for me." I effortlessly lifted my suitcase and loaded it into the back of my SUV. "I never once promised I was leaving it for you." "Then where am I supposed to live?" she shrieked, the reality of her situation finally crashing down on her. "My dad and my stepmom have made it explicitly clear. They have no room for me in their new apartment. You know what the housing market is like right now. I can never afford to buy a place on my own. Since you brought me into this world in New York City, it is your obligation to leave me a house here." I finally stopped loading the car. I slowly turned around, looking her dead in the eyes, and delivered my final verdict with absolute unbreakable finality. "Chloe, I have provided you with a life of total luxury and security until your 18th birthday. I do not owe you a single thing. When you start college in the fall, I will transfer exactly $20,000 a year to cover your base tuition until the day you graduate. Aside from that financial transaction, our relationship is permanently severed." But considering what ended up happening later, I only ever had to make that $20,000 wire transfer once. I opened the passenger side door of the moving truck, climbed in, and slammed the heavy door shut. The engine roared to life, and the truck began to pull away from the curb. Looking into the side view mirror, I watched Chloe desperately sprinting down the sidewalk, chasing the exhaust of the truck. She was sobbing hysterically, her voice carrying over the noise of the city traffic. "Mom, please. I don't have a home anymore, Mom." When she was a toddler, she used to chase me down the hallway just like that. She had tripped over her own feet, scraped her knee, and burst into tears. Back then, I had dropped everything, sprinting back to scoop her up, holding her tiny soft little body against my chest as she wailed into my shoulder. In those days, I genuinely believed that no matter what my daughter wanted in this world, I would sacrifice my own flesh and blood to give it to her. But she simply wanted too much. Mothers are not invincible superheroes. We get tired, we break, and sometimes, a mother just wants to live for herself. This time, she cried louder and harder than she ever had in her entire life. And this time, I didn't look back. Mia and I spent the next few weeks meticulously wrapping up our massive portfolios at the firm, handing off our accounts to the junior partners, and officially signing our resignation papers. On the morning we permanently left New York City, Mia was practically overflowing with luggage. She had 3 massive suitcases piled on a trolley, a designer duffel bag slung over her shoulder, and she had already shipped a dozen moving boxes ahead of us via FedEx. As for me, I stood on the sidewalk with nothing but a single sleek, carry-on suitcase, looking back at the towering steel and glass skyscrapers of Manhattan. My mind drifted back more than 2 decades. I remembered the day I first arrived in this city as a wide-eyed college freshman, stepping off a crowded Greyhound bus with a massive overstuffed canvas backpack that practically dwarfed me. An entire generation's worth of youth, ambition, and struggle had officially drawn to a close. I had arrived in this city burdened with the heavy expectations of my future, and now, I was leaving it entirely weightless. Mia and I adapted to our new life in the Napa Valley farmhouse almost immediately. In the past, Mia had always tinkered with writing fiction as a side hobby, quietly publishing under a pen name to blow off steam from the corporate grind. Now, she had transitioned into writing full-time, every single morning, as the valley was still wrapped in a cool ethereal blanket of morning mist. She would grab her MacBook and a mug of black coffee, settling into the wooden gazebo in our garden to write. Right beside the gazebo was a winding artificial stream that I had personally designed and built with the contractor. Fat, brightly colored koi fish swam lazily around our ankles, gliding through the crystal clear, bubbling water that flowed effortlessly over smooth river stones. As for me, I leaned fully into absolute unapologetic retirement. I did absolutely nothing but relax. Between the massive windfall from selling the Manhattan brownstone and the aggressive savings I had accumulated over 2 decades as a Wall Street executive, the interest and dividends alone generated a low 6-figure passive income every year. For someone whose material desires had completely evaporated, it was more money than I could ever possibly spend. Together, Mia and I planted a small orchard in the backyard. We put in 2 apple trees, a cherry blossom tree, and a pomegranate tree. Beneath their stretching branches, we laid down a winding stone pathway bordered by blooming wildflowers that filled the afternoon air with a rich, intoxicating perfume. I also built a raised bed vegetable garden, carefully enclosing it with a tight wooden picket fence. The fence was entirely necessary, mostly because an adorable, incredibly stubborn family of wild rabbits kept sneaking onto our property to steal my organic lettuce. Mia enthusiastically took on the role of head chef, managing all 3 of our daily meals. Her cooking was absolutely spectacular. After just 2 months of living in the valley, indulging in her homemade pastas, roasted meats, and fresh pastries, I could physically feel myself getting healthier, my face filling out with a warm, relaxed glow. I had completely disconnected from my old life. I bought a new phone, changed my number, and only gave it to a very small, tightly knit circle of trusted friends. I didn't hear a single word about Chloe or my ex-husband for a long time. The first piece of news I finally received came directly from my old college roommate, Rachel. She forwarded me a chaotic string of messages and videos from the private resident portal of her ultra-luxury Tribeca condominium. The primary video was a shaky, horrifying clip filmed by another wealthy resident in the lobby of the building. In the center of the frame, two grim-faced NYPD detectives were aggressively handcuffing a young disheveled girl and marching her toward a squad car. It was Chloe. Her face was pale, entirely devoid of emotion, staring blankly ahead like a hollow shell. Directly behind her, being physically restrained by a uniformed officer, was a woman screaming with a feral, blood-curdling intensity that didn't even sound human. It was Sophie, thrashing wildly, her designer clothes torn, her face twisted in pure, unadulterated agony. In the group chat, a resident had typed out the horrifying context. Absolutely devastating tragedy. It is a massive criminal homicide investigation now. That teenage girl dragged her infant half-brother out to the terrace and threw him off the 15th floor balcony. Another neighbor chimed in. The poor little boy. He wasn't even a year old. And his life is just violently snuffed out like that. The entire resident group chat exploded into absolute chaos. At first, the messages were entirely driven by the morbid, sensational shock of such a gruesome crime occurring in their pristine, elite bubble, but the tone quickly shifted when one of the real estate investors in the building pointed out the reality of the situation. A horrific, high-profile murder involving an infant just happened on our property. Do you realize what this is going to do to our property values? Every unit in this building is going to tank. The moment the financial implications registered, the collective sympathy evaporated. The residents instantly turned vicious, flooding the chat with furious curses, condemning David and Sophie's family, demanding that the condo board evict them immediately for ruining their investments. A few days later, Rachel called me again to provide a grim update on the aftermath. Ever since the murder, David and Sophie had locked themselves inside their penthouse, but the peace was non-existent. They engaged in violent, earth-shattering screaming matches that lasted through the night. The horrific sound of Sophie wailing, the shattering of expensive glass vases, and the heavy thuds of furniture being thrown against the walls echoed down the corridors. The neighbors, completely exhausted and furious, called the concierge desk and the police non-stop, filing endless noise complaints and harassment reports, but no amount of fines or police visits could stop the sheer velocity of their destruction. Shortly after that, the fragile remnants of Sophie's sanity finally snapped. The grief and the hatred completely consumed her, and she suffered a severe psychotic break. She was quietly removed from the building by paramedics and placed into a long-term psychiatric facility. Rachel told me that the day before Sophie was institutionalized, a neighbor had seen David standing outside the grand entrance of the building. He stood there in the freezing rain, entirely alone, smoking cigarette after cigarette for the entire night. He looked like a hollowed-out ghost, aging 20 years in the span of a single week. The following morning, he stubbed out his final cigarette, walked into the local police precinct, and officially signed a victim impact statement, pleading for leniency in Chloe's sentencing. It was the tragic, utterly broken conclusion of a man who had sacrificed everything to build his perfect, idealized family, only to watch it burn to ashes by his own doing. I sat on the wooden porch of our farmhouse, the California breeze rustling the leaves of the cherry blossom tree above me. I locked my phone screen, set it face down on the small patio table, and let out a long, heavy sigh. Whatever happened to them now? It was no longer my burden to carry. Their tragedy belonged entirely to them. The screen door creaked open, and Mia stepped out onto the deck, carrying two massive, steaming plates of food that smelled absolutely divine. She set them down and pulled up a chair next to me, her eyes sparkling with warmth. "Anna, look. I made your absolute favorite garlic butter and herb braised tiger prawns. Hurry up and eat them while they're hot." I smiled, picking up my fork as the rich aroma filled the air. The evening twilight descending over the valley was breathtakingly peaceful. The sky was painted in magnificent strokes of burnt orange, deep violet, and soft pink, here completely detached from the poison of my past. Two women who had finally claimed their freedom, were sitting down to enjoy a magnificent feast. Mia's rescue Shiba Inu came trotting happily up the wooden stairs. With a goofy wide-mouthed grin, he nudged his head under Mia's arm. She laughed, pulling the dog into a tight, affectionate hug. She lifted the dog's paw and gently waved it in my direction. "Come on, buddy, give your Auntie Anna a big smile." Down in the garden, the giant koi fish glided silently through the babbling stream, their elegant tails breaking the surface of the water and sending gentle ripples echoing outward. Along the pathway, the vibrant, sky-blue hydrangeas were in full, glorious bloom, turning their heavy petals toward the fading warmth of the setting sun. Life finally was exactly as it was meant to be.
That's all for today. I'm Lina. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing stories every week. Thanks for watching.